Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session on Indigenous communities and responsible management education opportunities and challenges. I'd like to first begin by acknowledging and paying my respect to the traditional custodians of the land on which we currently live and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We have an exciting session coming up in which we would be looking at what role business education can play in supporting self-determination for indigenous communities. We have three great speakers: Professor Grace McCarthy from University of Wollongong in Australia, Professor Rahul Ashok Kamble from IIM Kashipur, and Professor Vijayta Doshi from IIM Udaipur.
Right.
Like to welcome all the speakers first, and then like to formally introduce them. Professor Grace McCarthy is Dean of Business at the University of Wollongong, Australia. Passionate about lifelong learning, Grace is particularly interested in education, leadership, coaching, innovation, and entrepreneurship. She has many years of experience working in large multinational enterprises as well as in higher education. In her current role as Dean of Business and previous role as Associate Dean Education, Grace encourages everyone in the School of Business to play their part in addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, whether in their teaching, their research, and or their daily life. Grace herself teaches on the MBA in a subject entitled Responsible Leadership for a Global World, which interestingly includes students spending time in the rainforest with an Aboriginal elder and sharing an online session with the University of Wollongong, Dubai. Um, Grace has been awarded an Australian Government Office of Learning and Teaching Citation Award for outstanding contributions to teaching and learning, for using a coaching approach to inspire a love of learning among students and colleagues. She has also received several university awards, including Outstanding Contributions to Teaching and Learning, an award for incorporating Aboriginal perspectives in the curriculum, an award for research supervision, and being named a Woman of Impact. What an impressive bio. Grace, th- thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank
And
you.
I'd like to now move on to introducing Vijayta Doshi, who is an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur. Her research interests include gender diversity and inclusion in organizations, rural to urban migration and service work in India, entrepreneurship, and leadership. Her work has been published in the Asia Pacific Journal of Management, Gender Work and Organization, Journal of Business Ethics, Management Communication Quarterly, and Personal Review. Vijayta was conferred with the Best Paper Award by the Critical Management Studies Division of the Academy of Management in 2021. She is co-editing a special issue entitled The Business of Immigration, Bodies Across Borders in the Journal of Business Ethics. She is a co-editor-in-chief at CMS In Touch, which is a digital research platform supported by the Critical Management Studies Division of the Academy of Management and the Journal Organization. And she is also an editorial board member at Gender Work and Organization. Vijayta teaches organizational behavior and human resource management related courses to MBA and PhD students. She is the area coordinator of the OBHRM area at IIM Udaipur. She serves as a member of various committees, including the one-year MBA committee at IIM Udaipur that manages 5 programs. Um, I'm not going to read out all the 5 programs. I may mess them up. I'm so sorry. So thank you, Vijayta, for joining the session. Very welcome.
Thank you
Um,
so much, Professor Hari.
and finally, we have Rahul Ashok Kamble, who is chairperson of Executive MBA and assistant professor at Indian Institute of Management, Kashipur. Dr. Rahul Kamble is an assistant professor in the Department of OB and HRM at Indian Institute of Management, Kashipur. His research focuses on the marginalized communities of India, especially the Dalits and denotified tribes. He has written and presented papers on leadership, feminism, and denotified tribes of India. In his initial years of work, he was affiliated with Dalit Rights Initiative. He has completed his PhD in management and labor studies from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. He has also earned his MPhil degree from the Center for the Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal Nehru University. His MPhil dissertation was very related to the topic we are discussing now, that is deconstructing the colonial constructions of criminal tribes of India. During his master's degree in social work, Rahul worked with an Adivasi or indigenous social movement in Maharashtra, India. So, thank you, Rahul, for joining the session, and welcome all of you. Um, I'd like to start by asking for a very quick and brief remarks from you, or your response to this question we are looking at, which is what is the role of business education in supporting self-determination for indigenous communities? Um, this is just to warm up to the discussion. The reason why I asked this is because when I looked at this question, I thought, wow, can we even think about this? Okay, so we'll first start with that, and after that, each of you would be presenting for 5 minutes, followed by Q&A. Okay. Let me first ask Grace, like, what are your quick comments or thoughts on this particular question? The role of business education in supporting self-determination for indigenous communities.
Well, as in business schools, we educate leaders in our communities in all levels of government. And so this is our role. We can make a difference. That's my brief comment. I'll have some slides to share when we get to that.
Thank you. Rahul, if I could ask you.
For me, the major emphasis should be on the inclusion of the Adivasi communities in India. So we should not only limit ourselves to the basic mandate which has been given by the government, that is the political representation or the reservations for the education institutions and also for the public enterprise. But it should be more of a voluntary act from our end to include them in some of the major and leading positions in various organizations as well as the educational institutes.
Thank you, Rahul. Vijayta, if I could ask you, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we as management educators, researchers, or practitioners, we know the scheduled tribe community as more extraneously through affirmative actions mainly. But then a deeper level of understanding, a deeper level of indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing is largely missing when it comes to management education as well as research. And I can elaborate on this once I share my slides. But yeah, that's something I would definitely talk about.
Thank you. With this, I'd like to first ask Grace to give her remarks for about 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you. And I'll just share my slides. Okay, great. So I would like to start with what we call an acknowledgement of country. It's an Australian tradition that we have learnt about from our Aboriginal Australian colleagues and friends. And this is a wording that has been developed for our university by our Indigenous staff and students. So we acknowledge that country for Indigenous peoples is an interconnected set of sophisticated relationships. The University of Wollongong in Australia spreads across many interrelated Aboriginal countries that are bound by the sacred landscape and intimate relationships with that landscape since creation. The University of Wollongong acknowledges the custodianship of the Aboriginal peoples of this place and space that has kept alive the relationships between all living things. The University of Wollongong acknowledges the devastating impact of colonization on our campus's footprints, and we commit ourselves to truth-telling, healing, research, and education. And so when I look at this from the perspective of the business school, and I see what's happened in Australia, I have learned that for at least 60,000 years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have lived on the land now known as Australia. But the last 200 years have been absolutely devastating, with Aboriginal people only being given the vote in 1962 in federal elections, with Aboriginal children being taken away from their families to be brought up in a different community. I've learned that the health outcomes for Aboriginal people are worse than for white people, and that Aboriginal people are overrepresented in the prison population. But there is hope. And if you wonder why, I'll try and explain that very briefly. And also, why am I here as a non-Indigenous person talking about this? Let me answer that last one first. I am here because it takes all of us to make change, to make real change. And I will take every opportunity that I can to champion in the cause of Aboriginal people in Australia, so the world knows how much we have to learn from Aboriginal people and from First Nations peoples everywhere. And I've called it Hope for Australia because in 2017, several hundred Aboriginal Australian people got together and they agreed to call for treaty, for truth telling, for a voice. And our university supports that statement. And our recently elected Prime Minister is committed to that statement. And so this is really important that we find our way forward together. And one of the really important things we need to look at is role models in our students and in our staff. So we have some targeted recruitment posts that are available for people who are Aboriginal Australians. We have tutors and mentors for our students who have come from Aboriginal communities to join us in the university, because Aboriginal staff and students have to navigate two worlds, and that's exhausting, and a mentor can help guide and find a way forward to success. We have a reconciliation action plan, and we work with Aboriginal knowledge holders to incorporate Aboriginal knowledges in the curriculum. And I will just very briefly give you just a flavour of that with some pictures. And it's important because, as I said before, business schools educate leaders. And so in our MBA leadership subject, students are learning about Aboriginal perspectives on leadership, sustainability and decision making, which has been recognised in the Financial Times showcase of business schools addressing social purpose. And when COVID happened, we went online with this programme and received an award from the MBA Roundtable for embedding an Aboriginal perspective during the lockdown period. What is really heartwarming is that our students, whether they're from Australia, whether they're from Pakistan, Nepal, from Mexico, New York, all around the world, are saying that they learn a huge amount from taking part in this day with an Aboriginal leader. Whether it's out sitting in the rainforest or whether it's online, they find that they learn about connection, about responsibility, and that it is something that they take away with them to think about in their own context. So they learn about an Aboriginal perspective and how it can enrich their leadership practices. So they're not just learning about Aboriginal people, they're learning that they have a lot to learn. And this gives them respect for Aboriginal people and for Aboriginal knowledges. And that gives them a desire to learn more and to do things differently. And that's why I'm still learning. I go along on this day every time and I learn more every time. And that's why I have hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, for such wonderful and inspiring words. I'd like to now request Rahul to make his remarks, please.
Yeah. So, I would be speaking on the management education, that is making the management more inclusive and including the indigenous, that is the Adivasi communities of India. Now, when we talk about the when we talk about the Adivasi communities of India, They are officially termed as the scheduled tribes, and this is a legal and also the constitutional term. At the same time, we also need to know that the Adivasis of India are not a homogeneous group. Yeah, there are over 200 distinct, people, communities, more than 100 languages, and they vary greatly in their ethnicity as well as the culture. Now, according to the official census, the Adivasis constitute 8% of the nation's, total population, which constitutes around 84, million people. The largest concentration, of the Adivasis is mostly in the north and the central India, that is in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and along with that, we also have northeast India, which is actually a homeland of the large number of tribes in India, and these are all settled Adivasis. Now, apart from them, there are also nomadic communities and nomadic tribes, and also the denotified communities, which were initially, there was a colonial construction where they were stigmatized as the criminal tribes of India. Now, the majority of the Adivasis are mostly marginal farmers. Yeah, they are cultivators, and they majorly depend on the forests. Very few of them, I would say, are working in government organizations, and also few of them are included in the private sector. The communities are generally being perceived as having the oppressed position within the Indian society, and to minimize that, there is a political representation where we have reserved seats for the Adivasis in the parliament and also in the state legislation. Now, apart from the political representation, we also need to have, or we need to look, or maybe we need to relook about the representation of Adivasis in the higher education. There is a reservation policy, and 7.5% of the members of the Adivasi communities, the seats are being reserved for them in educational institutes and in public enterprises. But despite that, as per few of the reports, you would find that the undergraduation level across India is 79.8%. But if you compare it with the Adivasi students, they constitute not more than 5.5% of the total enrollment. The data regarding the graduation, the MPhil, the integrated PhD is not available. But when you look at the data of some of the higher education institutes like IITs or IIMs, the PhD is the Adivasis who enroll in PhD is not more than 1.7%. Similarly, when we talk about some of the business schools, only 4% of them belong to the total student population. Reason being is unaffordable business school education. On the other hand, when we also talk about the Adivasi faculty members, you would see that there are almost nil or less than 1% of the faculty members who are actually teaching in the Indian business schools. So here I would say that still in post-colonial India, the communities are still at the margins, and the meaningful participation is actually missing out. Apart from that, there is also a need for us, as in the business educators and also the corporates and the managers who are working in the corporation, to get themselves self-aware and get themselves sensitized about the culture and the well-being of the Adivasi communities. And but this is not happening. So because of that, let's say for instance, when you talk about if you go to Chhattisgarh in Fatehpur village, there is a protest against the coal mining plants. In Jharkhand, you would say there is a protest against the proposed mining project, and villages are about to be displaced, and they are going to lose their prime agriculture land. Recently, India came up with an excellent decision, to reject the Vedantas to mine the bauxite in the tribal, land. That actually marks a major victory for the human rights in country. So here I would say, our role is to ensure, to incorporate them, to include them in our business texts. When you teach leadership, when you teach participation, inclusion, and when you look out for diversity, some of the thought leaders of their community is missing. So we actually need to include that. Similarly, there is also a need for the representation of the Adivasi communities as faculty positions in some of the elite business schools of India. Similarly, the way they manage their stakeholders, yeah, how Adivasis manage their stakeholders, which includes the forest, which includes their own well-being and the outsiders' well-being, is very much different than the Western concept of inclusion. So hence we need to understand the term inclusion more from the Adivasis, that is from the non Western perspective. So hence I tend to understand this particular concept of inclusion from their perspective is to engage with all the people, with all the stakeholders, and you need to honor the unique potential of almost all the stakeholders and treat them in par with you. Yeah, with this note, I would thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Rahul, for telling us about the underrepresentation and some ways in which that could be addressed. We would now move to Vijayta, but I'd also like to make one quick announcement to the audience. If you have any questions, please do put them in the hop-in chat. We will be moving to Q&A after Professor Vijayta's presentation. Vijayta, if you could make your remarks, please.
Thank you, Professor Hari. If you could confirm that my slide is visible.
Slides are displaying just great.
So I hope my slide is visible.
Yes, they are visible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. All right. So what I'm going to talk about is this idea of toward management learnings from and with the scheduled tribe communities in India, with emphasis on from and with. So far, it has been learning about, and what I mean by that is we know that, okay, scheduled tribes is the official name of indigenous communities in India. Adivasi is a Sanskrit word for them, which means original inhabitants. And we know of affirmative action as management educators, researchers, practitioners. However, like I said, a deeper level of indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing is largely missing in business and management education, which requires this from and with that I was talking about, where it's about listening to them with a genuine concern as well as interest, wherein it's not just to see yourself as solving a problem, rather seeing it as something that we can learn from. And when the question arises, why should we do that? Of course, like many other aspects of diversity, there are often these two broad cases wherein we say it could be either a business case wherein we say that, okay, because it might benefit our business school students or business schools in certain ways, or there could be a moral case wherein we think that as citizens of a same nation, everybody has the right, like it's our responsibility as citizens to hear them, to recognize them. So it could be that as well. Um, so what I'm going to talk about is the role of business school education, the role of business school research, as well as the larger society toward management learnings from and with the ST community. Now, in B schools, as we know, in most of the B schools in India, we do have this short rural immersion program that we say, wherein students go for a few weeks, they spend some time in a rural area. But then it needs to go beyond that. How, as students, are we engaging with the community at large is an important question for us. So diversity and inclusion is very important. Diversity in terms of representation, but equally important is them feeling included, which involves breaking the stereotypes about terms like Adivasi, terms like scheduled tribes. Um, uh, and Personally, I see this as not just for our MBA programs, the flagship programs, but also the MDP programs, wherein the participants could be mostly from industry. And industry practitioners equally have a role to play. And by creating this awareness, we can bring about change, recognition in certain ways. Very important is involvement of recruiters. We know in these schools, whether we like it or not, recruiters are significant stakeholders. Placements do matter for the students. And if this involvement doesn't come from there, it might not have that ripple effect across various stakeholders. Coming to the role of business school research in this agenda of toward management learnings from with the ST community, this is something I would emphasize the most in my presentation, that we need to consider ST communities as precious source of alternative management knowledge. We often look for cross-cultural management topics or research. We talk about India and some other country, but we also can look within and learn a lot about how things and cross-cultural management lessons can be withdrawn, taken from these communities. Important aspects of teamwork, local organizing, resilience, and resourcefulness, making the most of limited resources. Many of them living in tough terrains. How do they develop this resilience? Has a lot to offer for us to learn. We could look at scheduled tribes inhabiting in rural India, as well as scheduled tribes inhabiting in urban India now. And there are unique challenges to both of these groups. Um, Empowerment and development, like many of us may approach this as an issue wherein there's a need to empower and develop these communities, areas. But very important for us as researchers is to think about for whom we are talking about this development, by whom, and with whom. Uh, Treating them as a significant heterogeneous group worthy of consideration in themselves. We often think about affirmative action. Okay, this much percentage is for this category, this quota is for that category, and we even sometimes combine various categories. But viewing each one of them in their own worth would be quite valuable for us. Now, these schools are part of larger society, as we know, and if larger society recognizes and commemorates indigenous communities in certain ways. For example, in Canada, currently I'm on a research visit in Canada, and it's not even, I mean, it's just been 2 months, and I can feel like the respect or recognition that's given to the indigenous communities, including just a small example saying that June is a month wherein it's dedicated, and it's called the National Indigenous History Month over here in Canada. Uh, and there are also totems at various places to recognize them. We know of tribal youth and workers associations in various towns, maybe cities or villages. But the point is, who participates in them? Are they just for the scheduled tribe individuals? The point is, if and because I've been researching on gender, and that's something we say, that when we talk about gender and we want larger changes to happen, only women talking to a women will not help, and therefore we need more non-STs to join this dialogue. So we need to move towards co-creating a society where one does not have to think twice about revealing one's ST identity to others. Unfortunately, we are not yet there, but then it's also an opportunity for us to join hands toward. And I think this session today is a great step towards that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijayta. Great presentation on a number of steps that can be taken in the Indian context. We do have a few questions coming up. First, there's a question from Deborah Cotton for Grace. The question is, the project that you've described, is it a standalone subject or part of another one?
The Aboriginal Day, in that particular one, is a part of the Responsible Leadership subject, which is a core subject of the MBA. But we actually look at Aboriginal perspectives in many different areas across all of our degrees. So our accounting academics sit down with the Aboriginal elders to look at what does that mean in accounting. Our marketing people, what does it mean in marketing? So we're all learning as we go, and it takes a long time to do this properly and to listen to those different perspectives. But it is core to what we're doing.
Thank you, Grace. We have another question, which is quite for the entire panel. From Pinosh Kumar Harose, it's on how can we bring more STs and SCs in management education? Are there any solutions? And a related question is also coming from Pardeep. It's about whether there is any hope of the kind that Professor Grace has expressed in the context of India in terms of including the Dalit and Adivasi people in the management education. So let me first start asking by Rahul and then move on to Vijayta, please.
Thank you. First is, how do we bring more SC, ST, in management education? Now, frankly speaking, that's actually a big challenge, for us, because the reason being is the main reason, is deprivation. Yeah, deprivation and discrimination, often going hand in hand. So that somewhat, kills the hope of a student from the marginalized community, to join some of the, elite business schools. That is one. Second is we also have, private schools coming up. Even the government institutions have also, increased their fees, and because of the economic deprivation, it relatively, becomes very difficult for the individuals from marginalized communities to be a part of this particular education. So government has, come up with numerous schemes. They have come up with few of the solutions, like providing scholarships for them, minimizing their tuition fees, and this is what it's been done. Apart from that, there could be other possibilities. Is, let's say, for instance, when someone when a person comes from a marginalized background and wants to get into a PhD, yeah. So here, one of the barricade, is to publish, is to come up with a good PhD thesis, yeah. That can be minimized, where people actually who are well off, from the marginalized communities, if they could come together, form a movement, or maybe an endowment fund for them, which can be sponsored. Maybe that could be one way through which individuals from the Adivasi or also from the Dalit background could be a part of the management education.
Thank you, Rahul. Vijayta, do you have any comments on that, please?
Yeah, just quickly, in addition to what Professor Rahul said, somewhere I also think about the language in terms of the CAT. If we look at Common Admission Test, which is the most popular one for top management schools in India, English is what you're tested on, and obviously the exam is in English, which could be a big hurdle for somebody who would have studied perhaps in a region or an area that belongs to these communities. So I think that is something, again, we need to think about, have larger discussions. But I think that's just one of the points. And that's where more of us, not just researchers, many of us need to join this conversation to deliberate on the possibilities. And on this, I'll link this to the other question that Pradeep has asked about hope. So definitely there is a hope, and that's why today we are discussing this. And we do hope that we take this conversation forward beyond this session, really. Um, why it may be missing is, again, I would say it's more of a research question than one remark that I can make. There are plethora of possibilities for this. But yeah, how to improve this is something we have to collectively think about. There were certain things in my mind, which, I mean, I'm sure many things I would have missed out on, but we need to have and continue this conversation is what I think. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vijayta. I'd like to pose this question next to Grace. Grace, like the points that are being made here relate to the extreme underrepresentation of the marginalized communities, and particularly today we're talking about Indigenous and Adivasi communities. So they constitute about 9% of India's population, and so that is about 100 million plus. So that's a huge number. But when we look for the Adivasi faculty, I recently was trying to find out people from the Adivasi background, and I couldn't get even 5 names. We couldn't find even 5 people uh, to be represented from among the 100 million population. There are not even 5 management faculty who we can identify as Adivasis, right? So, given this level of underrepresentation, given what do you think can be done to improve their representation and to bring their knowledge into business education?
Representation in Australia is also really low, and it starts back in school time and when they make their first choices about what to study at university. So, for example, when we've tried to find out why our numbers are low, and sometimes they have told us that they choose things like nursing and education and teaching because they see how they can help their communities, and they're very community oriented, whereas they didn't really see business like that. So some of our students have made short videos explaining how if you start your own business or you support a local business, that is helping your community because it's helping people stay in their communities, not having to go to cities to look for jobs. And so a lot of this is about changing attitudes really early on, because until they come to university to do their first degrees, and until they feel comfortable, recognized, seen, acknowledged, feel comfortable, that feel at home, that they belong at university, they can't go on to do their PhDs. They can't go on to take an academic career. So we have a long, long way to go in this in Australia too. And so I am really excited about this conversation because we can learn from how everybody is working across the world with First Nations peoples. But the other part is what I mentioned earlier, is about us having respect for how much we can learn about sustainability, for example, how Aboriginal people look after the planet, how they look after the forests. We have so much to learn that as we start to walk forward together, we will find answers to some of these others, not as imposed solutions that we dream up separately, but that we come to together. So I still have hope, but I do know what a long way we have to go. But this conversation is a wonderful thing to be part of because of the people that are attending, that are in the chat, the people that are on the screen. We can all work together. Even though it sounds like we're so different in terms of scale, but actually some of the challenges we're facing are very similar.
Thank you, Grace. That's a wonderful comment in terms of the career choices and how those can be influenced through information dissemination. Right. We do have more questions coming up, but we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to tell us one thing that you would like rest of the world to know related to the theme. One thing that you would like us to leave with. So let me start with Vijayta, please. Oh, sorry, Grace, please.
We need to listen. We need to learn. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to go forward together. That's it. There is no quick fix. It's a long journey, but it's a journey we take together. Listening and learning are the start. And being brave, being actually willing to speak up on behalf of people who sometimes don't have a voice, and making sure that they are heard and their strengths, not thinking of this as a deficit model, but actually thinking of this, where can we learn? What are the strengths? And sharing what we can, what we know already about what works in terms of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, because this is important too. Aboriginal people have a huge part and a lot we can learn from them in all of this. So listening, learning, moving forward together.
Thank you, Grace. Let me move on to Vijayta next, please.
Thank you. Very similar to what Grace has said, I think considering ST community as a precious source of alternative management knowledge, something that we can learn from, than just something that we need to fix or something that needs to be corrected. That's one. The other one is that treating ST communities as a significant heterogeneous group worthy of consideration in themselves. So yeah, these would be my two major things to ponder
Thank you,
upon.
Vijayta. Thank you. Rahul, please.
Yeah. So for me, it's like let's talk on this. Yeah, that is first. Make ourselves aware. What are our limitations? Yeah, let's change some of the attitudes or the stereotypes which we have. Yeah, educate ourselves about that this is a problem we have, and let's admit it. And the moment we admit it, then we look out for a potential solution, and let that particular solution be more of a collective approach. So here, uh, admit, yeah, discuss, come up with a particular solution, include them in some of the areas which you think that they are really underrepresented. Yeah, and inclusion is not just we are talking about representing a particular person and leaving that individual. Yeah, you need to nurture certain individuals belonging to these marginalized communities, providing space to them. So this is what my take is.
Thank you, Rahul. And putting together, yes, recognizing each of the groups as their own individual entities, as opposed to clubbing them as one group, listening to them, learning from them, and recognizing that this is a vast problem, a large problem that we alone cannot solve. And also, we may not be able to solve quickly, and using or having the hope to create action, to generate conversation. I think these are very, very important words coming from our panelists. I hope this generates that conversation going forward. With that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you, everyone.